I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 130 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. Today, I interview Peter Montoya. My co-host Bob Pondillo was not able to be here for this one. I heard Peter interviewed on Bart Campolo's Humanize podcast and wanted to bring him on to talk about his work in developing communities. Peter's one of those energetic communicators and creative brains that motivates people and discovers solutions. Very entrepreneurial. He was raised Catholic, but today models an unbelieving worldview that is non-threatening and, in fact, very amiable. I call this relaxed atheism, and it's something to which I aspire. Before we get into my talk with Peter Montoya, let me get a couple of things off my chest. My prescription for creating something tolerable in this world is saying yes to what is. By all means, find yourself, then love that self. Pursue your dreams, set goals, etc. But if at the end of the day you don't say yes to what's right in front of you, you'll always be chasing that next thing and hitching your happiness to it. I believe self-denial is actually more rewarding than self-indulgence. The good life is not about getting what you want, it's wanting what you got. What I mean to say here is that part of the loneliness and restlessness that we all experience comes from thinking that we're the only one fighting battles under stress, embarrassing ourselves with fits of anger, or saying things that we regret. We could tell ourselves that everyone else is having fun. Facebook kind of facilitates this. Everyone else is able to control their emotions. Everyone else has amazing friends, as demonstrated on TV shows like Friends or Seinfeld or New Girl. This loneliness and sense of missing out can be even more intense among ex-Christians. We devoted our lives to the social boundaries of the Christian subculture. We suppressed our true selves, our likes and desires, in order to be like Jesus. For some of us, when the Christian tent collapsed on top of us, we pushed and crawled our way out from under that heavy tarp. We got the sense that a party had been going on the whole time without us, a party we formerly regarded as sinful or worldly. Now we see that humans have been creating strange and exotic cultures, making music in all art forms, experimenting with scientific theories, calculating and understanding the cosmos, figuring out how to enjoy being human instead of shaming ourselves for being human. All the while we were parsing Scripture to unlock the code of God's hidden intention for our lives. So perhaps we feel like we've got a lot of catching up to do. Some of us came out swinging with rage and embarrassment and a hefty appetite for hedonism. But what I'm shooting for, and what I think my guest today models, is a calm, mature exploration of who I am, what I believe, what makes me happy, why I do the things I do. How can I achieve better emotional health? Where is my own moral compass pointing me to? How can I be a better husband, father, and friend? All things that I probably thought I was doing with Christianity, but this time not out of obligation to appease an angry God or please the judgmental measuring stick of my pretentious peers. This time, I'm doing it for me, because I can, not because I should. Not just telling ourselves lies in an attempt to get fired up or fake it till we make it, but affirming actual facts about ourselves, qualities and traits that are true, that everyone else around us already knows about us, but we've been too afraid to admit, or maybe even let it out. By seeing ourselves as the natural accidents we are, rather than the creation and property of an owner and master, we realize that we are neither good nor evil. We just are. And the sooner we show up as ourselves, comfortable in our own skin, having said yes to what it means to be ourselves, the sooner we live the fulfilled life. And by fulfilled, I mean the one in which we find ourselves, wherever that is at any given moment. It means being present and unafraid to be ourselves. This is the opposite of what Christianity taught us. We were taught to downplay our strengths and highlight our weaknesses. This was the virtue of humility, but I call bullshit. It is of utmost importance that we hone our skills, acknowledge our weaknesses, so we know when to act or not act, when to speak or shut up, to stay in our lanes, so to speak, and see the nuanced balance of our skill sets and lack thereof, and how we are neither savior nor invisible in the societies we orbit. I've felt this moral inversion imposed by Christianity for years, even as a Christian, but couldn't wrap my head around it until I read Nietzsche's theories on morality. This is a difficult concept to comprehend and will probably require revisiting many times before it really starts to sink in. This 8.5-minute lecture I'm about to play unpacks it concisely. I encourage you to listen carefully to this entire 8.5-minute excerpt of a lecture given by Joseph Vukov, professor of philosophy at Fordham University. It just might blow your mind. Listen also for how this upside-down morality would serve to suppress women even more than men in Western civilization.
Nietzsche begins his ethics with the proposition that there are only two basic types of morality, slave morality and master morality. These types of morality, Nietzsche proposes, were initially formed when society was actually made up of masters and slaves, in a society where masters were completely free and slaves simply had to do whatever their masters said. Based on their respective situations, Nietzsche argues, these two groups of people came up with two very different types of morality. Now, of course, there are no longer literal masters and slaves in today's society. However, Nietzsche proposes, the moral systems they came up with do. Therefore, if we are to understand and evaluate morality as it exists today, we must investigate morality as it was originally defined by masters and slaves. Let's look at the masters first. Remember that masters are totally free. They do what they want, to whom they want, whenever they want. How would such a person in such a situation begin to think about morality? Well, Nietzsche proposes a person in such a situation would begin by saying that whatever it is they approve of or desire is good. We can imagine such a list of things such a master might approve of. He will no doubt desire to show off his courage during battle, to keep power over his slaves, and to demonstrate his honor in front of his fellow masters. Goodness in master morality is therefore involving things like courage, power, honor, nobility, and so on. Now, you should note here that these things are not good in themselves. Rather, they are good because they are approved of and desired by the master. To put it differently, in master morality, goodness ultimately refers to the character of the master himself. Things and deeds become good in turn only when the master approves of or desires them. Okay, continues Nietzsche, so then what would a master view as bad? Well, badness for a dude that can do whatever he wants is simply going to consist in things and deeds and people that are lacking in some quality he desires. For instance, since a master thinks of wealth and comfort as good, he's going to see poverty and discomfort as bad. Similarly, since a master desires things like honor and power and nobility, he's going to look on deeds and things and people that lack honor and power and nobility as bad. Notice then that in master morality, badness doesn't really have to do with what something is, but rather with what something isn't. Poverty, for instance, isn't bad because of what it is, but rather because of what it isn't, namely wealth. To put it still differently, badness in master morality is nothing more than a lack of goodness. This then gives us a pretty good outline of the type of morality masters would have come up with. But of course, this is only one side of the coin. Indeed, in order to get a full picture, we need to also investigate the type of morality that slaves would come up with. So then, remembering that slaves are only able to do precisely what their masters tell them, how is the slave going to start thinking about morality? Well, says Nietzsche, if you're a slave, then your entire life is dominated by your master. Everything you do is for her. Clearly, in this position as a slave, you will come to resent your master. In fact, Nietzsche proposes, you will come to resent your master so much that you will begin to think of your master as evil, and everything that she values is equally evil. Moral evil thus enters the picture in slave morality as a form of resentment for the master and everything the master values. Things like, if you remember, courage, pride, bravery, nobility, and so on. Okay, so if slave morality gets off the ground by thinking about the evil master, then where does goodness enter the picture for slave morality? Well, Nietzsche argues, the slave will think about it like this. Evil is the opposite of goodness. I am the opposite of the master, and the master is evil. Therefore, it must be good to be a slave. Moral goodness, in other words, means being a good slave. For instance, a good slave is humble, never draws attention to himself. Therefore, it must be morally good to be humble. A good slave is also blindly obedient, does whatever he is told without questioning. Therefore, blind obedience must also be a good thing. And so on and so forth. You get the picture. Now then, we've got a complete picture of both master and slave morality. If you remember, though, Nietzsche's claim is that while masters and slaves no longer exist, master and slave morality are still alive and well. So how does Nietzsche think master and slave morality function today? Where does he see them existing? Well, slave morality, Nietzsche points out, is absolutely everywhere. Indeed, any time people ground their morality on some master rather than themselves, slave morality is going down. This master, of course, can be a person, but today it is more often the case that the master is a political, religious, or ethical system. For instance, Christians who ground their morality in Christianity make themselves slave to the master, Christianity. Kantians who ground morality in duty makes themselves slaves to duty. Nazis who ground their morality in the Nazi party makes themselves slaves to that party, and so on. In all these forms of master morality, Nietzsche points out, things like courage, power, and pride are expectedly portrayed as evil, while qualities like humility, obedience, and weakness are hailed as the highest goods. So slave morality is everywhere, but what about master morality? Nietzsche doesn't think there is much of this left. Indeed, the only time master morality is being practiced is when a person truly thinks for herself and lives by her own rules, when a person sees things like pride and courage as good because she desires them, and avoids things like cowardice and defeat. I think we have to agree when Nietzsche says that there really aren't many people out there like this today. But that doesn't necessarily make it worse. Indeed, Nietzsche proposes, despite the fact that slave morality is much more common today than master morality, we must still ask which one is in fact better for us as humans. We must still ask, in other words, whether slave or master morality is more capable of leading us to the good life and so fulfilling the purpose of ethics. In order to do this, let's consider the characteristics of both. Master morality says it is good to be brave, proud, courageous, controlled by our passing appetites, honorable, powerful, and so on. Slave morality, on the other hand, says it is good to be meek, mild, humble, self-controlled, weak, and abstinent. Well, says Nietzsche, these characteristics really don't tell us much about which type of morality is better for us. Indeed, we are intuitively drawn to and away from parts of both lists. Our intuitions agree with master morality that it is good to be courageous and honorable, but disagree that it is good to be proud. Similarly, our intuition agrees with slave morality that it is good to be humble, but disagrees that it is good to be weak. Luckily, then, Nietzsche says, there are other characteristics by which we can compare master morality to slave morality. Namely, we can compare their bases. In other words, we can compare their respective starting points. If you remember, master morality is based on, starts with, and grows out of the goodness and freedom of the character of the master. Slave morality, on the other hand, is based on, starts with, and grows out of the resentment on the part of slaves, resentment that leads slaves to viewing their masters as evil. Master morality thus grows out of goodness and freedom, while slave morality grows out of evil and slavery. When we look at it like this, Nietzsche feels, it is rather easy to decide which is the best type of morality, which is more likely at helping us as humans attain the good life and so fulfill the purpose of ethics. Indeed, the resentment and slavery that slave morality is based on are clearly not good bases for a good life, and in fact are the opposite. They are bases that will sap the life out of a person and keep them from ever living a good life. The goodness and freedom at the base of master morality, however, are precisely the sort of bases that will allow us to embrace all that life has to offer, and to live a truly good life. Therefore, Nietzsche concludes, master morality is a better moral system than slave morality. Indeed, only by living our lives according to it will we be able to live the good life and so fulfill the purpose of ethics. What this means, then, is that if we are to live a truly moral life, we must throw off the oppression of our masters, the masters of religion, politics, and philosophy, and instead begin living truly for ourselves.
So that's a brief lecture by Joseph Vukov, a philosophy professor at Fordham University, on Nietzsche's theory of slave and master moralities. I hope you have a better understanding of how modern morality was shaped by these social roles. A link to the YouTube is in the show notes. In conclusion, I'd like to give you a tongue-in-cheek axiom that has been the goal of my life for decades. Be who you is, 'cause if you is who you ain't who you is. Let us aspire to stop apologizing for being ourselves and being human and hiding ourselves from each other. This type of inner work of affirming yourself and showing up as the truest you is well laid out in Amy Cuddy's book titled Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges. I highly recommend it. A link to it is in the show notes. And to bring it back to my interview with Peter Montoya, I believe that being in community helps foster this type of personal growth. It is in the context of healthy, loving relationships that we feel safe enough to try out our true selves on our friends, selves that have been hiding in fear and shame for possibly decades. We need communities so we can see in more mature people what it looks like to be true and thus powerful. Not a power that wields itself over others, but one that lifts others up by modeling a healthy, inclusive confidence. We need safe places to give and receive honest feedback as we step out of the dressing room with our new duds on. There is a certain vulnerability that comes with choosing to confide in each other, trust each other, and exercise our innate gifts to help each other be brave and bold. I taped the following conversation with Peter Montoya on November 19th, 2016. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast, give it 5 stars, and/or leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And I mean that. I get an email or two a day from fans talking about how much they love the show, and I'd love to cut and paste it into a review on iTunes or something, but I can't do that. So if you feel good about the show and you've benefited from the show and you're writing me, please go ahead and just cut and paste what you wrote me, or, change the first person to third person or something, and paste it into a comment. It really helps generate traffic to the show. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge $1 per episode or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyonesagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode was recorded by Sam Mayer on a handpan in the New York City subway. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. Hello.
Hey, Cass.
Hey. All right, well, I heard your interview with Bart Campolo. And I'm a big Bart Campolo fan.
Me too.
Well, we have very similar journeys. I mean, other than I didn't live in the shadow of a very powerful evangelical minister.
Right.
But I myself was one, and he was, and we both deconverted, and now we're kind of pastoring people that are ex-Christian.
Right.
So we have Bart and I have a lot in common. We had him on the show, and I've been very inspired by his work. How did you meet Bart?
I think I cold called him. So I was starting up the New Freethinkers group, and I was having trouble. I had developed an ideology or a philosophy, but I was having trouble developing community. So I was looking for someone to help me in community development. So someone referred me to him. I called him and just developed a relationship from there.
And you're out there in California?
Yep, I'm in Orange County, and he's obviously just an hour up the road in L.A.
Well, it's not obvious to me. I've never been to California, so I have no idea how spread out things are there. But
please come visit.
I should. I would. I'd love to. I've got friends and family out there. Just never made the trek. Well, to start off with, I'd like to get your the context, the religious context in which you grew up.
Sure. You'll get a kick out of this. I have 4 brothers. Obviously, my name is Peter. Cass, I'm going to put you on the spot. What are my 4 brothers' names?
Matthew.
Uh-huh.
John.
Uh-huh.
Mark.
Uh-huh.
Luke.
Luke, you are 100%.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
It is. So I'm half Hispanic and then 25% German and 25% English. My dad's Catholic upbringing kind of ruled the household. Mm-hmm. So we were raised Catholic. I was an altar boy up at St. Felicitas in Perpetua in San Marino, California. And I actually had a fairly nice experience. I really enjoyed our Monsignor. And he kind of was going to church and being part of that community was nice for us.
Yeah, no big deal. No, you weren't. Obviously, you weren't molested.
No, and nor was I traumatized. He was a very nice community. He was a very nice man, and I'm so sorry that he passed away maybe 15 years ago before I had a chance to reconnect with him as an adult. I would love to have visited with him again.
Well, obviously, church has been around for 2,000 years for some reasons, and one of the main ones is the community and the ritual and the liturgy. You know, we're creatures of habit, and I think when there's this weekly thing, maybe some more than others look forward to it, but it's at least a staple in our lives growing up, you know?
I couldn't agree more. So it is a wonderful community, and I obviously have my concerns and challenges with the Christian narrative. I think it's a difficult narrative to actually stomach as an adult when you kind of hear it laid out to you.
Right.
So you have got to have something fairly compelling to bolster that narrative, to make it compelling enough to go. And I think community is one of the major reasons that people will kind of tolerate the narrative because the community is so beneficial.
Yeah. So do you remember at what age or what, if there was a catalytic moment or something to where you decided you weren't a believer anymore, or what?
I think that, well, now that I've learned, I didn't figure this out until probably the last 3 or 4 years, but I've got ADHD as my kids have ADHD. Now, I didn't know that I had that. And I probably had what's called ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder, as a kid as well. And that just means I'm a natural-born skeptic. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't in the classroom challenging it, but I was always thinking of a dialogue in the back of my mind going, how does this work again? I have free will and everything's determined by God. I was constantly having those kind of just challenges. But, for somebody who wanted to be accepted and wanted to be part of the community, I just didn't raise those concerns out loud until I was much older.
Yeah. Well, and it wasn't, it wasn't hurting anybody, and it wasn't, some of the main times and opportunities that we take as secularists is to push back against religion is only when we feel like it's encroaching on secular legislation, or we don't. I think for me, I don't care what people believe. I mean, especially if it makes them a nice person and it's not hurting anybody. It's only when it starts having toxic effects on culture and society that I think it brings out the anti-theist in me, the activist.
I absolutely could not agree more. And it's taken me a while to really get comfortable with that, because I think for a lot of people, when they are in a religion and they are divorcing their way out, they go through a period of anger where they really are angry at their intellectual repressors, the people who kind of put them in that ideological trap for a period of time.
Yep.
And they really can become very, very anti-theist. I think it's very unwise to stay in that transition stage much more than a year or two. You've really got to grow your way out of that because it's just not healthy.
No.
And at the end of the day, I know how intoxicating it is to have a conversation with somebody who is like-minded. I know what that means. I know what that feels like when you start talking with somebody and they have the same opinions, they like the same things, they're intellectually in mesh with you. I know how good that feels, but ultimately, believe it or not, that's it's going to sound probably kind of challenging. It's almost as shallow as saying, well, we have the same eye color, so we should be friends. Those beliefs, honestly, at the end of the day, that don't matter nearly as much as people they think they do. It's kind of deceiving. So I'm much more in line with what you're saying there, which is it matters to me the values. And I don't care what you believe. I just really want you to have pro-human, humanist values on as many different places as possible. And please don't try to force your tribalistic, anti-human values upon me or the rest of society.
Yeah, and that those anti-human, those really were the things that I had to break out of, because I think there's such a self-debasing, there's no good in me, the heart is wicked beyond cure, and that I'm lost, and without God I'm hopeless, and that's not a very good atmosphere to try to develop a self-esteem within.
No, I mean, it ultimately can set up a type of dependency is what that basically does. I mean, for many religions, they really demonize any kind of sexuality outside of marriage. So if you have all of the natural tendencies of a teenager, early adult, you have any of those natural tendencies, any of those lustful feelings, which are completely and totally normal, it just, if you believe in the religions, well, you are wrong and therefore you need us more. And I don't think that's healthy.
No, it's not. I think one of the phrases that I came to early on in my deconversion was, I will never apologize again for being human.
Yeah.
I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask for this nature. I didn't ask for the circumstances that happened to me by a babysitter, that opened up my sexuality or whatever. And so, I want to rein it in just like anything else, like eating or drinking or watching too much TV or whatever. I think it's something to be managed, but it's certainly not anything to be ashamed of.
I couldn't agree more.
So speaking of intoxicating conversations with people who agree with you, we're getting drunk right now on this because we are just we're finding how much we have in common. But
it is.
When I heard your interview with Bart, I didn't know who you were, and then once I thought, I am so community minded, and I wasn't kidding when I said Bart and I are still pastoring. We're just pastoring ex-Christians instead of Christians. And that is, that's just, I guess that's just part of my DNA, and that I love building community and helping people enrich and enhance their lives by relationships. And so I've started a couple of things. One, just by doing this show. We've been doing this podcast for 2.5 years. Its premise is that we interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about, which is deconversion or God. And I'd say there's probably out of 120 some episodes, there's probably 30 people that would still consider themselves Christians that I've had on. But they have deconstructed from fundamentalism to a more progressive version or something along the way. But the other 90 to 100 guests are full-blown atheists and find themselves either married to a Christian still, or that their family and friends, their parents, their siblings have all kind of turned on them or turned away from them or won't speak to them. I have friends that won't speak to me. That used to be dear friends, and once I deconverted, they left. So there's loneliness there, and there's confusion. I think when people say, they lose God, or they just, the bottom falls out of their some of their neural pathways, their brain is just wired to believe that this is the meaning of life, and when that departs, then it can be scary. So for all these reasons, we started this podcast to help people feel less lonely in their deconversion journey. And in so doing, I've ended up joining the Clergy Project, and there's Recovering from Religion. There's organizations out there doing these things, and then you can hook up with people in your area. So I have two groups on Facebook. One is we call it the support group, the private support group for everyone's agnostic, and that's global. Like we got people in England and Australia and the United States, and that's just an online chat experience for, what do you call it when it's not real? It's virtual. So it's a virtual community on Facebook. And then the other one is literally Middle Tennessee ex-Christians, and it's a secret group as well, because there's a few people in the group that are, not only are they not out of the closet, but their income depends on them staying in the closet. One is a sitting pastor at a church here in the area. And then another is a songwriter who gets Christian music royalties that substantiate about a third of his annual income, and he's afraid that if he comes out, they'll pull his music from the hymnals and such. So anyway, along those lines, that's why I wanted to have you on, is because with talking to Bart, you had some ideas and some experiments that you had done with building community and some of what you learned, and so you started I guess just talk about the newfreethinkers.org, or is that the website?
It is. So I really wanted to create a nationwide organization very similar to what Sunday Assembly did. Mm-hmm. However, just do it differently. And I thought it would be as easy to ignite as what they did, because they really took off like gangbusters when they started out of England, maybe only 5 or 6 years ago now. Right. And I'm also, by the way, now a member of the local Sunday Assembly chapter here in Orange County, which I like a lot. Cool. There's so many things in common. And what I discovered is obviously it's really hard to develop community. It is being a community organizer, activist is a full-time job and then some. Mm-hmm. It is really, really hard work, especially as you're dealing with a new or burgeoning philosophy in some regards. And yet, not that humanism is anything new, but getting the word out there, how do people come accustomed to it, understand what it is? It's something that they're not used to. I mean, people understand what church is. Even if they've never been to a church, they understand what the concept is and how it works, whether it be the funding through tithing or the weekly meetings or being part of a community or looking out for one another. They understand that. So developing a new community like that in the humanist realm is challenging. We developed a website. We started publishing, ration-based articles, which we try to be as objective as possible. We created an online Facebook community. We developed a local chapter here in Orange County, which we started doing a Sunday church replacement-like meeting. And then we also started doing weekly meetings, which we called TED Talk Tuesday, where we'd show 1 or 2 TED Talks and then have humanist ethics conversations around that. And we did those for, 6 months or so before I realized all the mistakes that I had made in creating that group. Okay.
We'll talk about those mistakes, because those sound like great meetings, but somehow they're just not sustainable.
So the first mistake I made was with a name. So, in the marketplace of humanist philosophies, you have skeptics, you got free thinkers, you got atheists, you got agnostics here, you got humanism, and probably some other blends there too. The free thinkers crowd is basically, we're going to look at all points of view and don't tell us what to value. Don't tell us what our values are going to be. Don't tell us what our beliefs are going to be. Every different philosophy is valid to at least think about. See, it's really hard to organize around that, because when you get a group of people together, every conversation is absolutely valid. It's really hard to generate any kind of consensus. Yeah. Whereas humanism says, well, hey, we value ration, and at the same time we've also coalesced around these basic core humanistic values. We've already agreed upon them, we've settled upon them, so let's take them and now apply them to our lives. So that was the first mistake, was using the freethinker moniker, which does get a lot of different people, but it's the spectrum of what is a valid conversation to have is so broad. Let me give you kind of my tipping point moment when I realized we were in trouble. We were talking about the biggest challenges facing the world. We talked about, income inequality, overpopulation, climate change, and we're just kind of trying to brainstorm what we thought were the biggest problems facing the planet. And someone said, well, the overpopulation problem is really easy to solve. All you have to do is get Ebola, put it into an aerosol format, go into airplanes, and then fly over population centers and kill off half the population.
Nobody said that.
He absolutely said that. He was a technology expert, probably at least a college degree or better.
And he was serious.
Oh, he was completely and totally serious. It was a rational thought to him.
So you're sitting in the room when he says that. What was did your jaw drop?
Yeah, completely and totally dropped. There was a gasp in the room. And I was doing a brainstorming session. In general, with brainstorming sessions, you don't reject any ideas because you want to create an environment where you're getting more ideas. And I think I muttered. I wasn't prepared for it. I had no vocabulary or preset phrase ready to combat that, but I think I muttered out something like, well, that idea is not the most civil, so we're not going to entertain that. And then I moved quickly on because I didn't want to completely shut him down. I just wasn't prepared for it.
Yeah, right. Well, I think this is part of what you and Bart talked about, and it's both, it sounds right, but there's an edge to it that I want to address, and that is, okay, it's too ambidextrous or too ambiguous, and so you end up gathering people. And then once you gather, instead of getting on to like what's going on in your life, how's your family, what are your concerns and joys, and kind of sharing life, the topic seems to always come back around to these varying beliefs that we're all bringing to the room. So something homogenous, something more centralized helps keep you from derailing every meeting with debate and argument and discussion around various beliefs. Is that close?
Yeah, it is very close. And the other thing with the freethinker moniker, the freethinker moniker does attract a good, healthy group of what I'll call, this is what my label, grinders. Mm-hmm. And both there's a segment of the atheist and the freethinker community, which are grinders, and these are people who just like to argue. They're usually men between 20 and 50 years old, and they do get a testosterone, adrenaline rush out of debate and
being
argument.
Right. Yeah.
And being right. Mm-hmm. I call that intellectual righteousness, and they can they look for opportunities to be in their intellectual righteousness, which is relatively an unempathetic place. It is looking for solution. It is looking for intellectual domination. Yeah. And one of the nice things is when you're working with the people that you're working with, which are people who have been Christian, they've learned to cooperate. They usually have some really good social skills, so they know how to moderate their opinions, know when to share them, when it's not healthy to. I really think that discussion is much better than debate. Debate is what you use to figure out who is right. Discussion is what you use to figure out what is right. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I'm a pragmatist, and I'm really much more concerned with what is right versus being right.
Yeah. Well, I like that differentiation. Who is right versus what is right. I'm going to remember that one. So the other part, the part that's a little bit tough, is I know that it seems moral and benevolent to include everyone. I literally had a pastor on this show a couple of weeks back where the name of his church is Open Table, and all are welcome. And that has an appearance, or at least that sounds nice, but within this model that you and Bart are talking about, there might be a time where you say, "Hey, I don't think this group is for you." So.
I could not agree more. So if and when I do this again, I will create with a group an organizing doctrine, philosophy, mission, and vision, and we'll use that as a way for people hopefully to self-select in and self-select out. But if somebody is clearly outside the parameters of the vision, mission, and organizing principles, to have a conversation and say to that person, listen, you may not be right for this group. We're over here. If you want to be part of this, what we're doing over here, great. Yeah. But if not, we invite you to find another group which is better for you. And that is absolutely mandatory for anybody who's serious about community development, because otherwise those people will toxify your group and will repel the people who you actually want to attract.
Yeah. Okay, so this opens up to something that I think is pretty honest, at least for me, to talk about on this show, because what I have found within what we'll just call, for the lack of a better term, the atheist movement, is I've been to American atheist conferences. I've been to, these little conferences and seminars that pocket atheist groups will put on. And sometimes I get there, and I'll either be in a small meeting or maybe these large meetings, and sometimes I'm on it. I mean, this sounds elite or it sounds snobby, but sometimes I say, these are not my people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And within the movement, you still have the whole spectrum of the human race. Just because we're atheists or non-believers doesn't really change who we are. And so there is this place where I'd rather be with whatever that means, with people that I'm comfortable being with. And there shouldn't be any shame in that, maybe.
I couldn't agree more. So I believe the atheists have a positive message inside the marketplace of intellectual ideas, and I think they really should be out there. However, I also believe that it's a limited spot, and any individual should not spend too much time there. It really needs to be transitory. I think that organizing a lasting pro-human group around being anti-theist or anti-religion has very, very limited benefits for society. Mm-hmm. So as you know, and I'm sure you have had many, many experiences, whenever you get into a debate with somebody about their political or religious or any other core beliefs, you debate them versus discuss with them, you're going to run into the backfire effect pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. The backfire effect is a psychological effect where the more you argue with somebody, no matter how rational, how much information you bring, the more entrenched they become in their actual belief system. So it actually is counterproductive. So a lot of the atheist groups will actually go out there provoking people of belief, and it actually has the opposite effect of what they want in most circumstances, which then makes them more entrenched. Yeah. So the atheist groups that I've been to, some of them are anti-theist, and some of them are just I don't know. And atheism, the common definition for atheism is anti-theist. So when most people think about atheists, they assume those people are anti-God or anti-religion. However, the real definition of atheism is atheist or without God, which is actually fairly benign, which means anybody who doesn't know who God is by definition an atheist, which is fairly benign. But many of the atheists I've met have been more engaged in intellectual righteousness and wanting to sit there and think about how right they are and how dumb believers are. Yeah. I don't think that's that productive. I don't think that is a good, long-term, lasting, pro-human group.
Yeah. Well, no, and you're right. The people that a lot of times you're objectifying, they double down.
Well, they do.
And yeah, we've seen it many times. I used to have this thing, even when I was a preacher, I think I even used this metaphor. I wanted to go as an experiment, just go into like a big crowded place, like a mall or an airport or something, there's just lots of people around, and then just stop somewhere and look up at the ceiling or the top corner of the room and then like point and just look, and then just watch how many people end up like looking in that direction. And the point is that if I took my finger and pointed it in their face and I started accusing them of X, Y, and Z, then they're gonna run away and nobody's gonna even want to witness that. It's ugly. But if I take my finger and I point it up at some abstract object away from everybody else, then people get curious. And so it's a metaphor to say, okay, if we're a community, we're a group, instead of being something built around what we are against, we build it around what we're for, and that has maybe a little more allure to it to the public or to people that might be curious about your group. So one of the things that came up in your talk with Bart was that it's good to have a mission, some kind of missional statement or something around which people can gather and energize for something bigger than ourselves. I mean, that's another one of those things that makes religion so appealing, is that everybody wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And we see this in the military. We saw it in Peace Corps. It's like we're gathered here 6, 7, 15, 50 people, shoulder to shoulder, blood, sweat, and tears, getting dirty, getting busy, looking to each other for help and assistance. I mean, these are exciting things that that energize and synthesize the community, the feeling of community that this is where I belong.
I completely agree with you too. So, in some regards, you want to be as broad, to be as inclusive as possible, and then at the same time, you got to be smart enough to kind of figure out, here's our stake in the ground, here's our flag. I would imagine I will probably, when I get involved in a group again, probably use the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights as probably the flag that I'll plant, because no matter what nationality you are, what country you live in, the human rights are fairly universal. And even in this country, as divided we are between Republicans and Democrats, it'd be really hard to disagree with any of the human rights as defined by the United Nations.
Yeah, and do you hope to? There's a couple of things that I think would maybe come up as far as somebody saying, I want a community. Do you want it to be kind of secluded from society and almost a refuge or a sanctuary from life and the business of life, and just really focused, and I hate to say navel-gazing, but just really an introverted group that is interested in just each other's lives, and or have something where your attention and your resources are directed outward? And if so, what would I mean, adopting the UN definition of human rights is one thing, as ideologically, but if there ever was a time like in your community where, let's say that Trump does start to register Muslims, or something's going on where he's deporting children born in the United States or whatever, is there a desire in your mind to have a group that is organized for the sake of maybe some political, speaking truth to power or punching upward?
Yeah, that's obviously a line it's really, really tough to walk, because people. I am a complete and total political junkie, and the prism from which people view the world. With Americans view the world oftentimes is through party first. So we create these tribal litmus tests in belonging to certain groups, and it really is an opinion bubble. So, if you believe X, Y, and Z, well, clearly you must believe everything that this Republican tribe or this Democratic tribe believes in. And oftentimes that does come true. People really have been polarizing more and more to those groups. So it's really hard to start talking about doing politics, because it is so incredibly divisive. Now, that being said, in my completely informal analysis, my guess is that probably 80% of, I'll say, non-believers as a category, or secular humanists, probably 80 or more percent of them are probably liberal leaning. So you wouldn't probably lose too much of the audience when you start pushing for any kind of pro-human progressive causes.
So I'm not sure if this is what identity politics is. That's a phrase that's come up a lot since the election. Do you have a good understanding of what that means? And if so, can you help unpack it for me?
Sure. So the Black Lives Matter is really easy, because it's obviously largely, but not completely, Black Americans, African Americans in that. It is viewed by white America as a Black nationalist movement. However, Black Lives Matter would disagree with that. Nationalist movements are more or less, they could be based around race or something else, is a movement where they say our issues, our concerns are more important than everybody else's, and look to dominate everybody else's agenda. So they are seen as a Black nationalist movement, which is one of the reasons you actually saw the rise of Donald Trump and white nationalism. So whenever you see a movement, you're going to see a counter movement to counteract that. So the Black Lives Movement is a great way of looking at identity politics, because they're largely interested in Black American issues, or at least perceived that way anyway. And then obviously with the rise of Trump, they use that counterweight, balance it, and then you're seeing a large insurgence of white nationalism in what we call Trumpian, the Trumpian ideology.
Yeah, well, that's frustrating, though, for me to hear, because if somebody does, I've always thought, we used to talk about it in Christian terms, the body of Christ, that some people are elbows, some people are ears, some people are knees, and together it makes a very functioning thing, and we need every part. And so when somebody says, hey, I've chosen litter and pollution as my calling card, or my issue, and this is what I'm going to work on, and I might even start an organization to where every Sunday we go pick up trash on the highways or whatever. Now, it's a lot more benign, and it's less threatening to anybody because there's hardly anything to counter that. Somebody says, no, I'm pro litter. But anyway, I guess if there is something of concern in the culture, and somebody rises up and says, hey, I feel like that there's this demographic that's neglected, maybe even abused and discriminated against, so they rise up to try to equal the scales, only to then generate, like you said, a counterbalance and pushback. Oh man, that's just frustrating to.
It is. So I, as a kid, thought that everybody was objective. So I thought more or less what you said, which is, hey, if there's another part of our society that's hurting and I'm doing really well, I'm going to be willing to compensate for that and help that other group out. This is all part of my American tribe.
Yeah, how naive of us.
30 million people. And I would be willing to sacrifice something for my fellow Americans. And that is not what's happening right now in our country. No. So what you're seeing through my eyes is what we'll call 0% capitulation and 100% capitalization. And now here's what I mean by that, is that whenever you are attacked, your organization, your special interest group is attacked, you are going to capitulate 0%. So let me use a non-race-based organization. Let's talk about Social Security. There's probably a pretty good argument to raise the retirement age from, late 50s, early 60s, and probably start adjusting that upwards so we can actually afford that. That is a very pragmatic, practical solution, and any economist would say, that's a good idea. But if I was a politician, as soon as I said that, the AARP would come out and say, well, first of all, 0% capitulation. We're not changing it at all, not even for future generations. And then 100% capitalization, we're going to go out and target that congressman, whoever said that, as being anti-Social Security because they suggested it. 0% capitulation and 100% capitalization. And the same thing happens too in any of these other political movements, whether it be the NRA or the Black Lives Matter. We're going to take anything that anyone says against us, we're going to twist it in a way, contort it in a way that it seems to be, we're not going to capitulate to it, and we're going to capitalize it in a way to scare our members. We're going to gin them up, juice them up in a way so they're more scared, more angry, they give more to our cause, and we're going to go out and fight harder.
Okay, yeah. So I hate to oversimplify it, but for someone like me or my listeners, capitulation and capitalization could be give and take. 0% give, 100% take.
That's exactly right.
Okay, there, I got it. All right, I want to bring up something you mentioned it on Bart's show, and I went and watched it, and it's Sebastian Junger.
Uh-huh.
And now, is he associated with the documentary Restrepo?
He sure is. I think he was the producer of that, and obviously I think he narrated it. So yeah, he's the creator of that. Also, he is a wartime correspondent and also author. He wrote the book The Perfect Storm, and you may have seen that came into a movie. So he's a very well esteemed author and writer.
Okay,
journalist and writer.
My son, who's now 19, but for the last 4 or 5 years, he's an interesting kid, and he just is a documentary junkie.
Me too.
Just watches tons. He just hours and hours of documentaries, and he watched Restrepo, and I think there was a second one, and he was so moved by it. He said, "Dad, we got to watch this together," and he and I watched it together. And then I found out there's a young man. I say young man. He's probably 35 or something, but to my 50, he's young. And I interview ex-Christians, and I found out this guy was right here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is outside of Nashville. and he was an ex-pastor, and I thought, well, I need to have him on the show. And so his name's Adam House, and he came in, and we were interviewing him, and turns out he's also ex-military. He's got PTSD from military service in Afghanistan and such, and he was based on that very location where Restrepo was filmed. And I can't remember if he knew Restrepo. Restrepo's a guy's name that it was named after. And I don't remember if he served with him or was there after his death. But so that anyway, when I hear Restrepo, my son, it comes to mind, and I thought, all right, well, I'm going to give this guy a listen. So I went out and watched one of Sebastian Junger's TED Talks, and he's talking about PTSD and this absurd suicide rate amongst veterans, 22 a day on the average. And he comes at it from the angle of, one of the things that men and women in the military experience is really deep, meaningful community. And they come back over here. And America, like you said, I mean, we are a very divided nation, zero capitulation, 100% capitalization. We're all closed up in our houses, whereas, maybe in the 70s or something, we were more out on our porches or just things have really polarized here. And it's to come home from the military where you had your brother or sister's back, there was just a deep bond, and there's no bond here. It's hard for Americans to not kill each other in traffic every day because we're just so angry and we're so estranged. And I think really more than ever we're disgusted with each other. And so there's judgment is really high, and grace and tolerance and cutting each other slack, which I think religion contributes to that, but that's another story.
Can I jump in on that point for just a second?
Yeah, for sure.
So what you're talking about is what we call it's actually a marketing term. It's called cocooning, and this has been happening over the last 40 or 50 years, where people are cocooned in their houses, their cars, and their offices, and they're relatively isolated. And it's accelerating at this point also in the way that we use services. So maybe 40 or 50 years ago, if my car was broken down, I might call my neighbor to come pick me up. I would take my car to my shop. I would call my neighbor and say, hey, can you help me out? Can you give me a ride before or after work? And we would rely on people in the community. Yeah. But nowadays we say, you know what? I'll just Uber. I'll pay for that service. Today, I don't want to. I feel like I don't want to impose on my neighbors. So I'm not going to move myself. I'm not going to ask my neighbors to, hey, come over to my new house and we'll have a painting party and help me paint my house. I'm going to hire that out. I'm going to hire a removing truck. We're hiring these services versus depending on one another for these services, which is obviously kind of breaking down some of the social fabric. And yeah, we're losing grace. We're much more angry, much more isolated. And what I think more importantly, more than anything else, is we're losing empathy, which is the ability to put ourselves in the shoes of another person. Right. That's what's really lacking in our society today. Please continue.
Oh, yeah. So you were the one that recommended this Sebastian Junger guy. How were you inspired by his angles?
So I always had thought that community was easy to develop, and obviously in developing a community, I realized how incredibly hard it was. And then what the distinction that Sebastian talked about is he talked about community being one level of connectedness, and this actually is a tribe, which is a whole nother hyper intense level of community. Bart has done a wonderful job of laying out what a community is, and he talks about these common elements, and let me run through them real quick. Number one is shared relationships. And I've got really hundreds of really good friends, but most of my good friends, they don't know each other. But I travel around the country, I can go and stay with them and dine with them, but they don't know each other. And shared relationships is where I know you, Cass, and you know Bart. And when Bart is out sick from our regular meeting, we say, hey, where's Bart? So we can gossip about him, but not in a mean, cruel, or juvenile way, but in a more communal way. Hey, where's our friend Bart? We wish he was here. Yeah. We would have shared values, a shared mission, shared rituals of some sort, and shared experiences. And I think with the shared experiences, I really think that mutual suffering is one of the big ones. And I mean that benignly, not that we're going to torture one another. But you even see it in gangs. Obviously, they go through a ritual of beating each other up, and that suffering is actually a bonding experience.
Yeah.
I do CrossFit, and I suffer with a group of people through workouts, and that is a very close bonding experience. The same thing happens, I think, in the military going through boot camp. So I think mutual suffering, that mutual experience is really, really important. So that's one level of community, and churches do that really effectively in building communities. And then what Sebastian was talking about was a whole nother level, which is a tribe, which is usually a group of less than 150 people who share all those things we talk about in community and then also live with each other. They're actually, smelling each other. They're in each other's space on a regular basis. And they also have shared common defense oftentimes, shared eating. They're going to a whole nother level of intensity.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's certainly a differentiation that needs to be made. And I even like the fact that you smell each other, because part of really kind of saying yes to one of my slogans is say yes to what is. And part of saying yes to what it means to be human is acknowledging that most of the time we preen and primp up so that when we go out in public, and not only do we put on perfume and makeup, but we put on a smile, we put on an image. And a lot of masks and a lot of fronts and a lot of insecurities. And I've often thought about, circumstances like if this elevator breaks down between floors and there's 6 or 7 people on there, we're going to defecate in the same room. I mean,
Right.
And somehow you're going to have to say yes to the darker or the nastier side of what it means to be an animal, to be a human.
Oh, can I talk about that for just a second? So you're absolutely right. So we as human beings, when we're out in society, are insecure about our placement in that society. So we are usually fairly inauthentic. We do put on that mask, which we think was what the world wants and will like, and we're inauthentic. So obviously with your family, there is a whole nother level of authenticity and intimacy.
Yeah, because you can't sustain that mask in an intimate environment.
And intimacy, I heard a great definition, which is intimacy. Into me, you'll see. Into me, you'll see. So that is when the mask truly drops and they really see you for who you are. I have a lot of experience in personal development seminars, and it's one of the things they do incredibly well. Usually within 24 hours, they get people to kind of drop the inauthenticness and be authentic. So you're really intimate with other people. And it really is absolutely critical for both communities, if you really want to bond with them, and obviously with tribes as well.
Yeah. Now, I've been a part of retreats or seminars to where within the first 12 hours, people, somehow the way the seminar is constructed, people are saying things. And I know there's confidentiality and stuff that people feel safe. But anyway, I love drilling down. So into me, you'll see. That's another great takeaway from the show. And this is a free show.
People should be paying for it.
Yeah. So I should be branding myself. You're the marketing guy. I should maybe, after we get off the taping of this podcast, you can coach me in how to market my show. But anyway, so another thing that you said, all right, so going back to shared experiences and one of them being suffering, I used to say this, and this is actually a Pauline scripture. Now, when I was a Christian pastor, and I used to work heavily with scripture memorization. I was almost, in fact, I did use the stuff from the Navigators, which is a campus ministry, and they have whole little booklets and things where you keep them in your pocket and you memorize stuff. And one of them was, Paul said, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his suffering. And that just resonated with me because I felt like, war buddies are lifelong buddies because they went through shit together. And they went through hell and back, And so that's there's just nothing like that. All right. Gosh, I'm pretty tapped out as far as the questions that I had. What's up next for you? I mean, you basically tried to do a physical meetup. Like you said, it went for a few months or 6 months, 9 months, and kind of fizzled out. Mostly, I know that you shared on Bart's show that it was hard to get other people to step up and take some of the responsibilities. And you're probably a pretty good delegator, but people just weren't responsive enough, and you felt like you were carrying carrying the weight all yourself. And I know that's a killer.
It is, yeah. So if and when I do it again, I'll get a group of people together, a collection of people, start building it organically, most likely in very close proximity. I think that one of the things that Bart talks about is, you can find people who are more diverse in their opinions, but really close to each other, meaning down the street, and probably more effective in building a group just because you see each other every single day. And I absolutely and completely agree with that. And then I will build a group, build the organizational principles with that group, and then make sure that I have them vested enough they actually want to do the work. It's absolutely huge. You've got to do it that way. The other thing I'll probably do if and when I start a group again, I will probably start it with a 3 or 4 day intensive seminar. In that intensive seminar, like a retreat that you have been to, we'll get to obviously teach the core principles, indoctrinate people in the values of the organization, and get to that place of intimacy.
Up front.
A 3 or 4 day high intensive seminar can be an incredible tool to building community in an incredibly short time. And I've been to a lot of the big seminars, whether it be Tony Robbins or LifeSpring, Landmark, Psi seminars, just to name a couple. And they do an amazing job of building community, and then they don't follow through with any kind of regular meetings for those people on an ongoing basis. That's where they kind of fall apart. So I want to marry a community structure like you do with regular meetings along with a high intensive seminar on the front end.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because now I'm wondering which came first, the chicken or the egg or the cart or the horse or whatever. But so is it at that meeting that you share the vision of your idea, or do you share the vision of the idea with people and then get them to come to that meeting? Because if you're putting together a community and expecting these people to give up 3 or 4 days of their life, they have to know how are you going to communicate what they're buying into?
I probably will share it. I am a lot of the seminars, what they'll do is they'll basically, even Scientology, is say, okay, I'm going to give you a taste of it, but there's a lot of things I can't tell you until you're there, because it's a big giant secret. You got to pay for the secret, and you're not ready for it yet. You got to be prepared for the secret, and I don't think that works in a free information culture that we now have. I don't like the manipulation of it either. So I'll be relatively transparent. We're building a community. Here's what the organization principles of the community. This is the process to get you into that community, and I'll explain it to them right up front, so there's nothing hidden about it. Yeah. And oftentimes the people that we really want are the people who are highly intelligent, but oftentimes fairly isolated, and they won't buy that. They won't go unless they know there's a fair level of transparency. They're too skeptical.
A fair level of transparency within you. Like they pick up on you that you're showing all your cards.
Absolutely.
Okay, okay. I thought, yeah. So, yeah, that's given me a lot to think about, because, yeah, my wheels are turning, and I happen to have a microphone shoved in my mouth right now. So I'm. All right. So one of the things, there is a really powerful meetup group here. I say powerful because it's 800 people strong, and that just shocks me as far as just this town is about 100,000 people, suburb of Nashville, and there's a thing called Free Thinkers Meetup, and it's 800 people strong, but at any given meeting, there's only 12 or 15 people there. And I notice in the description of the group, which was started by a friend of mine who I love and respect, and she's been on this show, and we hang out, one of the things that it says is, we're just going to socialize. No books, no talks, no engagement, like no intentional engagement. We're just going to shoot the shit. And honestly, I've been to those meetings, and I find them boring. And so what I did is I started a group to where it's very intentional. Like I'll give you my format, and this is our monthly meeting. From 6 to 7, people gather casually, come in whenever they can or whenever they want. They come right at 6, come at 6:30, come at 6:45. But it's the gathering time, and everybody's bringing an appetizer, and it's BYOB. At 7 o'clock sharp, we all sit in a circle, whether it's a living room or whatever circumstance, but we sit in a circular shape, and everybody, we take the number of people in the meeting, which is usually about 12, and we divide 60 minutes by that number. So everybody gets 5 minutes, and there's literally a timer. And people take their time, and they can share whatever they want. This is how I'm feeling. This is what went on in my life this week. This is the book I'm reading. This is what I'm angry about. They can share whatever they want, and ideally, they are not to be interrupted. You can't ask questions. You can't interject. You can laugh, obviously, but it's their time. And then at the end of that 5 minutes, the dinger goes off, and it's the next person. And there's no follow-up, to that person, at least for now. So everybody goes around in an hour's time, and everybody has had their chance to share. Now, ideally, if people are really engaged, they have a pad and pen to where if something is said in that person's 5 minutes, then they jot it down, because the 8 o'clock hour comes and everybody is like bathroom break or refill your drink or make another plate if you want, I guess. Then at about 8:10, everybody comes back together and we discuss. It's just open forum. And anybody can say anything or talk. And if you kept notes during the first hour, check-in is what it's called, check-in, then you can bring up things that were said because you weren't allowed to in that hour. Then at 9 o'clock, there's another break, and the meeting's over at that point. But if people want to stay and chat, we've stayed till midnight before. So what do you think of that format?
Oh, sounds great. Formats can really be diverse, and they're fairly organic. You just got to find the one that works well with the culture of your group. But it sounds really interesting. I go to that meeting. Yeah,
as opposed to say, we're just going to shoot the shit. I'm not interested in that.
I have been to a free thinker meeting like that, and it bored me as well. It just didn't do anything for me. I don't go back to that meeting very often.
Yeah, I'm not really into small talk. I like to drill down quick, and if I ended up with somebody that drilled down quick, they talked about real things in their life really quick, then that might be interesting. But it's kind of rare that you find somebody that comfortable in their own skin enough to be that transparent. But all right, so
I would love to, if I still have a minute or two,
sure,
is to drill down a little bit deeper into how misleading the intoxication of a person who has like-minded is. I want to drill in on that, because I've got a pretty good topical example about how misleading and manipulative that actually can be.
Okay, so you're about to talk about groups that are so like-minded, they're so homogenous. Is that where you're going?
No, actually, I'm talking about when you start talking with somebody, they seem like-minded, how powerful and intoxicating that is, but how it isn't nearly as important to having shared values.
Okay, yeah, I'm interested.
Got it. So I'm going to use a political example, but it's fairly topical, and it will make sense with this.
Okay.
So as we've been talking about in this podcast here, is that when you start talking with somebody and they share your same view of the world, we'll call it your worldview,
sure,
your opinions, and oftentimes your taste, there is an intoxication of that, and you start getting kind of excited about that.
Yeah.
But I'm telling people that is fairly misleading. So here's my first example of that. Obviously I'm a non-believer. I really hesitate to call myself an atheist because people will assume that I'm anti-God or anti-religion, which I absolutely am not. Mm-hmm. I really will support people in their belief system and just don't think it's my place. I've drawn my own personal boundary that I don't challenge people's religious or political beliefs. I just don't do it. Mm-hmm. And to that end, I'm married to a very, very devout Christian who's part of a very, very powerful Christian family. And we not only coexist, but we thrive very, very well in the dynamic that we've created because of that. So for most people who would be a non-believer, when they get into a relationship with a believer, would probably not last very long because they actually just don't seem to share the same worldview. However, for my wife and I, who I'm madly in love with, who I deeply respect, what we've discovered is we share almost all of the same core values. The values are much more important for building a lasting relationship than having the same worldview oftentimes, or the same kind of being like-minded.
Yeah. And
being like-minded, believe it or not, can be really manipulative. So we're going to use the most recent election here of President-elect Donald Trump as an example of that. We can talk about lots of reasons of why he won and lots of reasons why Secretary Clinton lost. However, I'm going to give you the most general, easy to look at reason why that happened. And Secretary Clinton just did not connect with voters. Almost every person who I know who voted for her said, yeah, I'm voting for her. But there was very few people who I found with any kind of passion about her. It was kind of like a resignation of sorts. Yeah, I'm going to vote for her. President-elect Trump, on the other hand, connected with the vast majority of his voters. They were passionate and enthusiastic about that. Secretary Clinton had a hard time filling rallies. People didn't go to them. On the other hand, President-elect Trump, his rallies were full. And the reason, it's kind of interesting, he was a Democrat, a New York Democrat, liberal Democrat for 65 years plus of his life. He is fairly gaudy in his approach. He looks like a rich fat cat. He is everything that non-college educated whites should hate. He's completely and totally contradictory to the person who they would actually think would like. But he got in front of rallies and he said things that were consistent with their worldview, such that they go, oh my gosh, this person is like me. He is like-minded like me. He cares about what I like. To the non-Trump supporters who look at PolitiFact or any kind of Realpolitik polls about his truthfulness, 60 to 70% of the time, he said things that were not true. Only 30% of his statements were actually factual. So the rest of us who were not supporters of his quickly look at him and said, he's not truthful. He's not an honest person. But you ask most of his supporters, they believe he is incredibly honest, incredibly truthful. That's the power and the intoxication of being falling for being like-minded. So I really want people listening to the podcast to not overvalue that intoxication of being like-minded, because it can be used against you, and you can be manipulated with just finding agreement on worldview.
Yeah. Well, and I think you mentioned earlier, I think you called it ODD, which is odd. But
right. Oppositional defiance disorder, right.
Yeah, which is a form of natural skepticism and contrarianism. And, because you have that predisposition, you watched this happen, probably with befuddled amusement. It's like, how are these people getting so pulled in and drawn in and, like you said, intoxicated? They got drunk on Trump. And before you know it, they're just, they elected him president. And it was so strange to watch.
It was so strange to watch, and those people, I honestly and completely and totally believe within 18 months to 2 years, they're going to be very disenchanted.
You're going to be hungover.
I think it's very unlikely that President-elect Trump is actually going to change their lives much within a couple of years. It is not his MO, mode of operation. Past performance is the best indicator of future results. I'm not saying the past equals the future, but it really is a good indicator. And President-elect Trump does not have a good history of taking care of masses of people. He does a good job taking care of himself and those in his inner circle. Yeah.
Well, all right, Peter, we've picked your brain on the stuff, but I'd like to end with like lighthearted stuff about people's humanity. So, like, what do you and your wife or your kids do for fun?
My wife and I, we absolutely love to travel, and we are privileged beyond belief, and incredibly blessed. So I think this last year we went to Germany, France, and New Zealand and Mexico. So we love to travel, and I think one of the benefits of traveling, aside from the thrill of seeing other cultures, is how important it is to see one's own culture. I really like the phrase, the last thing to discover water is a fish. Fish didn't discover water because they were in it. Yeah. Which means that it's really hard for us as Americans to see our own culture unless you can compare it to other cultures. Exactly. Yeah. And it's one of the things that's really helped me empathize with other people and other Americans is traveling as much as we do.
So those are 4 big trips within a 1-year span. Is that part of your work? Takes you around, or?
No, I own a software company, which is my full-time job. I were able to work wherever I am located, so it gives me lots of flexibility.
One of them goddamn entrepreneurs, aren't you?
I am. And then also you mentioned I'm a marketing and branding guy too. My earlier career, I was a speaker and trainer in the area of personal branding. I wrote a series of books around the idea of personal branding. The best known one was The Brand Called You.
Cool. And people can still get those books?
Yeah, you can find them on Amazon. I don't think they're any good anymore. They were good at one point in time, but they haven't been updated for this new digital world that we live in. So don't pay very much for them. They need to be updated.
Okay. What year did you write those?
I think the last one came out in maybe 2006. So the last one was 10 years old. And, Facebook really wasn't into existence yet. And Facebook
changed
is
everything.
It has changed everything. It is the best personal branding tool ever invented in the history of mankind. And it's free. So, any of the social media platforms are absolutely critical for building personal brands. And it just didn't exist 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. All right. So are you a reader? Like, you reading anything right now?
Yeah, I'm still finishing Hillbillology. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but it basically helps to kind of explain white working class people and their philosophy, their social conservatism, and the challenges they have with how the rest of the country operates. So I'm reading that one right now.
So your boys, you got 2 boys?
I have a 13-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son.
All right. What are they into?
They're both, fairly nerdy, like their dad is. So they really like comics and all of the fan type stuff, and the Harry Potter. They go pretty deep into fandom and video games.
Have you ever done Comic-Con or any of the conferences along those lines?
They really want to go. Those large crowds, I don't do well in those large groups. But I will eventually take them at some point in time. And also, obviously, there's all those outfits that can be kind of sexual in nature, too. I don't want them seeing all that kind of stuff. If you go to Comic-Con, I'm a little young for that.
Okay, one last question. Is there a person in your life, whether there's a teacher or maybe a parent or a hero of some sort, that you would identify as being a real shaper of your identity? And if so, describe the effect they had on your life.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad to answer that. Dr. Clayton Ching was my football coach my freshman year, and he really transformed my viewpoint. And I think it was 8th grade, actually, when I played football for him. Up until that point, I was really a victim both to myself and to the world. My self-esteem was low. I worked really hard at football. He pushed me, and I think through that process, I transformed from being a victim to being responsible. And I also came to understand how I could actually change myself. And rather than just being this mass of knee-jerk reactions, both psychologically and physically, I actually could start to control myself. That was absolutely a transformation process of my life, was playing football with him when I was 14 years old. And I thank him, and I have thanked him many, many times, because I still see him for for being such a wonderful leader in my life.
You still run into him?
I do. He was my best friend's father. He lived across the street.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I still do see him. Wonderful man.
Yeah, that's great.
He changed my life.
So are you open to, like, if some listener of this podcast wants to reach out and talk to you about whether it's marketing or maybe, anything, if they wanted to, where could they reach you, and if so, how?
Absolutely. So I love to talk about marketing, branding, politics, and community building. So if somebody says, hey, I heard you and I want to run some ideas back, bounce some ideas off you on community development, I would love to talk about that.
Yeah.
And they can reach me really easily by email, which is Peter Montoya at petermontoya.com. No dots, dashes, or spaces, just Peter Montoya at petermontoya.com. And they can call me as well. They call me, I'll actually answer the phone. 949-334-7070.
Wow.
And if they want to check out, if they want to check out my group on Facebook, we do make posts every single day. I think our new Freethinkers page on Facebook is really good, high quality content. And just go to Facebook and search New Freethinkers, and you should find us pretty quickly. We got 67,000 followers, and we post daily.
That is amazing. 67,000 followers. How long did it take to generate that?
A year probably was the bulk of that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So before I close, I just got to, I know you're probably sick of hearing this, but one of my favorite movies was The Princess Bride. I say it all the time. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Yeah, for those of you who have not seen that movie, go out and find online The Princess Bride. It is a wonderful movie both for you and your kids. It's a great line.
And you got cousin Inigo is on that show.
I wish. If you read the book, by the way, there's actually a story behind his name. He's actually Inigo, like Inigo into the danger, Inigo under the bridge. Inigo is actually where his name came from. But yeah, it's pronounced Inigo.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Peter, for talking with me. I've really enjoyed it.
Cass, it was a thrill. Thank you so much, and thank you for the good work you're doing out there for humanity.
So that's my talk with Peter Montoya. I really enjoyed talking with him. He's a great guy. I hope you benefited from that. I know I did. I'm driven by past experiences, some of which were in Christian context, to be involved in community. Peter talked about levels and layers of community or tribes, and defined by proximity or common interests, but also shared suffering. And I think that can be achieved by intentionally getting involved in some cause, but also by sitting together and sharing our everyday suffering that life ultimately imposes on everyone on a regular basis. The idea of getting together and sharing your life stories, drilling down, getting to know each other intimately, is very enriching and exciting, especially if it's recurring. It can become something you look forward to, a place that helps you feel less alone in your struggles. We need this, people. We need one another. We're pack animals. We really start to live when we're actively involved in helping others and letting ourselves be helped by others and making a tangible difference simply by loving one another and listening and expressing compassion and shared experiences. This is what the ex-Christian movement needs. We need each other. The problem is that it's messy sometimes and taxing on time and energy. Often it becomes overwhelming if too few are the caretakers of the group and experience burnout. These are pitfalls that are common in community building, but I hope this talk gave you some inspiration toward being more involved as both a beneficiary of the community and playing an active role in making it happen. This is one of those things that isn't going to land in your lap. You might have to get out of the house, risk awkwardness, risk exposure, spend precious time, energy, and even money to keep it going, and exercise a lot of grace, if you will, to borrow a religious term, and patience with the complexities of being human. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week. Think about how you could be better connected at a local community. Do some research to find groups in your area and start reaping the benefits of being actively connected to others in your area. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.